The Middle English period is marked by the great reduction in the inflectional system inherited from Old English. This tendency was accelerated by the social upheaval and the mixture of tongues that the Norman conquest brought about. But it was already noticeable in Old English from the end of the 10th century. This e-lecture summarizes the main developments in Middle English morphology. As usual, we will look at declension and conjugation. But what exactly were the reasons for the morphological changes? Well, let's start with this question. Among the reasons for language change, two changes seem to have been most effective in Middle English. One of them is language contact. Old English often mixed with Old Norse. Even though English and Scandinavian words were sufficiently different, doubt about the correct form of ending arose, leading to the use of other devices to express the relevant distinctions. The simplest solution to make loanwords compatible with Middle English was to drop the inflections completely, a procedure that had already been used to some extent with Latin words in Old English and could now be applied to the French loanwords that came into the English language during the Middle English period. And then there were phonological reasons. The weakening and the eventual loss of unstressed syllables at the end of words weakened many of the Old English inflections. We already discussed this example in the e-lecture Old English Morphology. But this is what happened. In words such as erdan, first of all the final vowel was reduced. Then a typical tendency was that nasals, final nasals, merged to alveolar nasals, and eventually these nasals were dropped. By the end of the Middle English period, English only had a handful of inflections left over. Let us look at some of them and start with declension. Middle English had changed from a synthetic language to a much more analytic language depending on word order and particles, indicating the functional relationships between the words in a sentence. In comparison to Old English, the system of declensions, that is, inflections of nouns, adjectives, pronouns and determiners, was heavily reduced. So let's look at nouns first. By late Old English, the case affix that denotes the dative in Old English had changed to So this is what happened until late Old English. So namum became namen, folkum had become folken, and erdum had become erden. So here you see the merger of the final nasals to alveolar nasals. At about the same time, all vowels of all inflectional endings were reduced to schwa plus nasal. Later, the final nasal was also lost. So in Middle English, the first step was then to reduce these endings to a type without the final nasal. And by late English, the final vowel had also disappeared. So the eventual results were nam, folk and erth, though in many cases in spelling the final e was not dropped. As a result of all these changes, the case distinctions in nouns were reduced to two cases by the end of the 15th century. So the cases hund, hundes, hunde, hund, hunde, of course this is the present day English word for dog, hound. These cases were eventually reduced to two cases, the oblique case and the genitive case hundes. Well, and in the plural only one case remained. Hundas, hunda, hundum, hundas, hundum just became hundes in the plural. The only difference between Middle English and present-day English was the use of a few plurals ending in en, which have since disappeared, such as Eien, Hosen, Pesen, etc. With two cases and no distinct grammatical genders, the morphology of Middle English nouns was in many ways now identical with that of present-day English. Needless to say that, just like in Old English, the distinction between singular and plural was fused with the case ending in Middle English. Of all word classes,